Tyler Oliveira is selling outrage. So this individual, who seems to have made a career essentially of demonizing different groups, whether it be the trans community of Thailand or whether it be Somali immigrants in the US and so on and so forth, he seems to at least be trying to make a career out of pandering to deep-seated anxieties that many seem to feel. And that is problematic because, well, bigotry and prejudice, by their nature, ethics aside, are inefficient, and so therefore are not conducive to the running of a proper society, of a thriving society. But that aside, let us get into his more recent work, in which he describes the Hasidic Jewish town or village of Kiryas Yoel as the welfare-addicted Jewish town or village or whatever his description was. And let us get into that. So, the first criticism that I have to make is that population decline changes the moral baseline entirely. Why is that? Well, if the right is correct in that population decline is this civilizational catastrophe, which, whether or not Tyler Oliveira has explicitly come out and said, I am right-wing, he is pandering to the right. It is using many of the right-wing talking points. And so that is why I bring this up. If it is the sort of devastating existential crisis that they proclaim it to be, then having American communities that have a high rate of fertility is a net positive. This is a gain for America. Why don't you want more Americans? If you were concerned about America losing Americans, essentially, more dying than are being born, negative population growth, then having a community that is able to produce more Americans without needing immigration, which seems to be the number one thing the right in America is most concerned about, then that is a positive. How is that a bad thing? That is my first point. My second point is that pronatalism requires two things. It requires a material element. The material conditions need to be so, and it requires a cultural element. And so, therefore, governments, in my opinion, ought to be pronatalist. Governments ought to be creating the material conditions needed for population growth. This is a good thing. And then community leaders, rabbis, imams, pastors, bishops, tohunga, priests, priestesses, whatever, they can then fill the cultural gap and allow the community to grow in numbers, if that is what said community aims for. The government should be providing the material conditions for the national population to actually grow. Again, this gets back to my first point, that population decline changes the moral baseline. You can't have it both ways, because on the one hand, you can't claim that population decline means the end of Western civilization and all of this sort of nonsense, and that, America is about to fall because her numbers are shrinking and all of this crap, but then at the same time demonize American communities that are doing precisely the opposite, that are having children, that are growing at a rapid pace. What do you want? Do you want Americans to be having children? Or do you want population decline? You can't have it both ways. So that is my second point. And My third point with regards to Oliveira is this. The idea of a net taker. So throughout the entire video, he puts forth this idea that the Hasidic Jewish community is taking more from the system than they are contributing. This sort of reminds me of the sort of black crime nonsense, this idea that although white people commit the majority of crime on average, as demonstrated by Martin Bernard Arcou, not because of any sort of intrinsic evil on the part of white people, but simply because they are the bigger population, there's more of them. The fact of the matter is that it is the majority of people in prison and so forth are going to be other groups. And so, therefore, this is used to justify the notion of per capita, that African Americans, for example, commit crime at a higher rate per capita than white people, meaning that there are more black criminals than there are white criminals. The problem with that reasoning, and this is something that's been thrown out for decades now, and everyone just seems to believe, they just sort of seem to prima facie accept it, is that it cannot be falsified because the nature of crime is secret. Think about it. Jack the Ripper never came forward and revealed his secret identity to the world. And so, therefore, any criminals that are out there, irrespective of which demographic they belong to, are hidden because they are hiding. And so you cannot falsify that. So therefore, based on the data alone, you cannot say X group commits more crime on average. You can only demonstrate that X group is approached by police more often than average. Similarly, when it comes to the Hasidic community, they all work, they all pay taxes. All of the men work, everyone pays taxes, and everyone pays the same taxes as the rest of you. Consumption tax, sales tax, income tax, so on and so forth. That is number one. Number two, there are many wealthy people within the Hasidic community, and they pay tax in addition to hiring non-Jews. That's an enormous contribution. Number three, they give to charity. Now, yes, charity is mostly focused on their own community. However, ostensibly speaking, it is open to all. And finally, because they live by the Bible, you know, that book that many in the American right claim to live by, they don't commit crime, they, no drugs and things like that. And so therefore they save the American taxpayer in many ways, on top of the fact that they are American taxpayers. Finally, the other element that needs to be taken into account here is that even if they are net takers, okay, let's just say that, which you cannot demonstrate, honestly, just like the per capita thing, we can't say definitively. But even if we were to say that, let's just bear with me here. The fact of the matter is that if a large percentage of their population are children, those children are going to grow up to do what? Pay taxes. So therefore, it is a future investment. And remember, those children are American. The other point that Oliviera keeps bringing up is that the community of white separatists being persecuted, but Jews can do this, and so therefore there's a special privileged position for Jews that white people don't have. The fact of the matter is that while I personally think that anyone should be allowed to go build their own community and do whatever the hell they want, we have to acknowledge history. And history is why those laws are in place. This was a previously dominant group and had a level of domination that is almost unprecedented in human history, even when you compare it to, say, the Islamic empires in which Muslim men held a relatively privileged position. If you think about it, even they don't rival the absolute privilege that white people had in white-dominated societies, such as early 20th century America, New Zealand, Australia, and so on and so forth. This was a degree of privilege that is quite frankly, makes you want to vomit, and is the reason why those laws are in place. And so I'm not saying white people shouldn't be allowed to form their own communities. I'm all for it. But Oliveira is being dishonest when he doesn't acknowledge the history. The Hasidic Jews built their own community in the aftermath of genocide. White people today trying to build their own communities is in the aftermath of once being dominant. The two are not comparable. Finally, I think that this reveals something ugly, which is that the criticism that Oliviera is bringing to the table here is not really about population decline, is it? And it's not really about saving America or anything like that. It's about the fact is that certain people, certain ugly actors, only want more of a certain kind of American. And I think we need to be honest about that. It's not about saving America. It's about saving, or rather preserving, the dominance of a certain group within America. And so Tyler Oliveira, I would conclude, is far from an American patriot.